There are three different types of speech and language impairments. The first is articulation problems, which is when the process of producing speech sounds is flawed, resulting in speech sounds that are incorrect. The second is fluency problems, which is when the hesitations or repetitions interrupt the flow of speech, for example, stuttering. The third type is voice problems, which is when the voice is unusual in pitch or loudness, given age and gender of the individual. According to the United States Department of Education, speech or language impairment means a communication disorder such as stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment, or a voice impairment that adversely affects a child's education performance. According to the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, a speech and language disorder may present when a person's speech or language is different from that of others of the same age, sex, or ethnic group. When a person's speech and/or language is hard to understand, when a person is overly concerned about his or her speech, or when a person often avoids communicating with others. Speech and language impairments are really two separate but related disabilities. A speech impairment is when a person's production of speech sounds is either impossible or difficult to decipher and therefore interferes with communication because it is distracting to the listener. A language impairment actually disrupts the communication and interferes with the listener's ability to accurately understand the speaker's messages. 18.2% of students ages 6 to 21 have identified disabilities. It is the second largest special education category behind learning disabilities. In 2013, 1,373,000 school-aged children were identified as having a speech or language impairment, representing 2.8% of the school-age population. Young children, ages 3 to 5, demonstrate misarticulations and non-fluencies in the course of normal speech development. These mistakes are not indicative of problem in need of therapy. So what are the warning signs? Well, a 3-year-old child with language impairments might only speak in 2-word combinations. We start to notice speech or language impairments at the age of 3. Children with language delays generally acquire language in the same sequence as their peers, but more slowly. Many of these children do not have a disability and catch up with their peers. However, some children who acquire language in the correct sequence do so very slowly and never complete the acquisition of complex language structures. It is a mistake to assume students have disabilities because of their cultural or linguistic backgrounds. Here are 5 tips, strategies, or instructional techniques for use with students with speech and language impairments. For elementary students, encourage cooperative groups inclusive of students with speech and language impairments. There are many benefits to group work and collaboration. Field notes revealed that some children, as having language impairments, self-volunteered information in group settings, asked questions, or answered questions, and when they did, others in the group tended to ignore their contributions. So to ensure that students have a chance to contribute, teachers may need to coach the students with disabilities and their peer group. Second is direct vocabulary instruction. Examples include prioritizing vocabulary when starting each new curricular topic, based on the 3-tier vocabulary system, embedding vocabulary in the students' learning through activities such as creating visual symbols to assist with word meanings and retention, and conducting whole class interactive morphemic analysis that include identifying root words, prefixes, and suffixes for better understanding of unfamiliar vocabulary.
Third is modifying the teacher's oral language. According to Starling, Monroe, and Toger in 2012, examples included ensuring that instructions were explicit rather than inferred, allowing time for students processing and verbal responses, repeating and rephrasing key information and instructions, and facing the class when delivering the teacher's written language. Starling, Monroe, and Toger 2012 state that this includes breaking down large amounts of information into smaller, visually distinct sections, adding graphics and visual icons, providing descriptions for instructional vocabulary, and ensuring that all questions were on the same page as the text. Fifth is maintaining consistency between the school and the student's family. According to Cash, Wilson, and De La Cruz, home programs should be provided so the content, form, and use of language interactions can be facilitated in all environments. A child will do best with support from both home and their school. 5 things teachers should know about students with speech and language impairments include to not ignore them and show support instead. Showing support demonstrates that they have nothing to be ashamed of and can boost their confidence. Ignoring the impairments can make a student feel isolated and less than. Second, speak slowly and clearly and use short and simple sentences. Using shorter words and simple sentences can help the student better understand what is expected of them. It can also serve as a model of what they are supposed to sound like. Third, don't interrupt the student when they are talking. Try not to finish sentences or words for the student either. Let them work through what they are trying to say. Fourth, praising the student will make them more confident and more likely to work on their impairments. As an educator, you want to make your classroom as welcoming as possible for all learners and encourage them to grow. Lastly, pair students for in-class reading assignments. This can help the student with the impairment speak better without singling them out. Remember that impairments have both good and bad days. A student might do really well on Tuesday, but on Wednesday they struggle. This does not mean they aren't trying. Try to be encouraging. Again, speech and language impairments is the second largest special education category behind learning disabilities, and there is a 96% rate of co-occurrence between speech problems and language impairment with learning disabilities. If you are unsure if a child has this disability, be sure to talk to a specialist. To conclude, let's think about this question. What do you think is the most effective way to foster a positive, collaborative learning environment and an inclusive classroom between students with speech and language impairments and those without?